1. William the Conqueror, 1066–1087. Imagine a cathedral filled with nobles and clergy, the air heavy with incense and grief. As William the Conqueror's massive body was lowered into his coffin, the unthinkable happened. His bloated stomach burst open with a sickening pop. The stench was so unbearable that mourners fled in panic, and the funeral was hastily ended. Thus, the mighty conqueror who reshaped England's destiny left this world not with solemn dignity, but amid chaos, horror, and the foulest smell in medieval history. 2. Edward I, 1272–1307. Edward I was a fierce warrior king, feared by the Scots and revered by his men. Yet his final wish was shockingly grim. On his deathbed, he commanded that his body be boiled after death, his flesh stripped away so that his bones could be carried into battle against Scotland. No one dared to fulfill this macabre request. Instead, he was buried in Westminster Abbey, leaving historians to wonder, was this the ultimate symbol of devotion to war, or simply madness born of obsession? 3. Edward II, 1307–1327. Edward II's reign was defined not by war or glory, but by scandal. His heart belonged to a man named Piers Gaveston, a favourite despised by the nobility. Gaveston was banished 3 times, only to return again and again to Edward's side. Finally, his enemies captured and murdered him, shattering the king's heart. This tragic love story not only fueled rebellion, but also sealed Edward's fate. He was eventually overthrown and killed, remembered less for his rule than for his forbidden passion. 4. James IV of Scotland, 1488–1513. James IV was a king obsessed with knowledge and the mysteries of the world. In one of history's strangest experiments, he placed 2 infants on a remote island, raised in total silence, to discover the natural language of humanity. James believed they would speak the tongue of Adam and Eve. The result was haunting. The children spoke nothing at all. This bizarre attempt at science revealed nothing about language, but everything about the king's eccentric curiosity and the darkness of medieval experiments. 5. Richard I, 1189–1199. Richard the Lionheart is famed as a crusading hero, yet he barely ruled England at all. In 10 years on the throne, he spent only 6 months in his own kingdom. The rest of his reign was spent on campaigns, in foreign courts, or as a prisoner of war. To his subjects, Richard was a distant figure, admired for bravery, but almost a stranger. In truth, England was merely a source of gold and soldiers for his endless wars abroad. 6. James VI of Scotland, 1567–1625. James was haunted by fear of the supernatural. When a violent storm nearly sank his ship, he became convinced witches had conjured it to kill him. His terror sparked one of the most infamous witch hunts in British history. Hundreds of innocent women were accused, tortured, and executed, victims of a king's paranoia. James even wrote a book on witchcraft, spreading his fear across Europe. His reign left behind not only political unions, but also a legacy of dark superstition and bloodshed. 7. Edward V, 1483. Edward V's story is one of history's greatest mysteries. Crowned as a boy, he ruled for only 2 months, never even receiving a proper coronation. Then he vanished along with his younger brother. Most believe they were murdered by their uncle, Richard III, in a ruthless bid for the throne. Known as the Princes in the Tower, their fate has never been proven. Their disappearance remains a chilling symbol of the brutal politics of medieval monarchy. 8. James II, 1685–1688. James II's reign was short and turbulent, but his marriage was even stranger. His second wife, Mary of Modena, reportedly wept every time she looked at him after their wedding. This bizarre detail became a cruel metaphor for his rule. James's overt Catholicism angered Protestant England, leading to his overthrow in the Glorious Revolution. Yet it is the image of a queen crying in despair beside her own husband that makes his story unforgettable. 9. George II, 1727–1760. George II's love for his wife outlived even death. Before he died, he gave a macabre order. Their coffins should be placed side by side with the sides removed so their remains could mingle for eternity. Some see this as deeply romantic, others as horrifying. When George was finally laid to rest, this eerie wish was honoured. Today, visitors to Westminster Abbey stand above their tomb, left to wonder whether love truly conquers all, even decay. 10. Henry I, 1100–1135. Henry I's death was as strange as it was preventable. Obsessed with his favourite dish, he gorged himself on eels, ignoring the desperate warnings of his doctors. Soon after, he fell violently ill and died, leaving the kingdom in chaos. His reckless feast triggered a bitter civil war over succession, known as the Anarchy. Thus, the fate of England was altered forever, all because a king could not resist one final meal. 11. George IV, 1820–1830. George IV lived a life of extravagant excess. He managed to amass debts equal to £78 million in today's money. Parliament agreed to erase these staggering debts, but only on one condition: that he marry a German princess to secure political stability. George reluctantly complied, turning his personal life into a public bargain. His story reveals how royal marriages were often less about love and more about politics, and how even a king could be bailed out like a reckless gambler. 12. William IV, 1830–1837. William IV had a temper as wild as the sea. During a heated dispute with his councillors, he stormed away, not by walking out of the room, but by taking an entire fleet of ships and disappearing for 10 days without telling anyone where he was going. The kingdom was left in confusion and fear. When he finally returned, he was promptly removed from his role as Lord High Admiral, a reminder that even kings cannot simply vanish at will. 13. Elizabeth I, 1558–1603. Elizabeth I, the legendary Virgin Queen, had a softer, more playful side. She was once engaged to a man she affectionately called "My Frog." In a display of devotion, she even wore a frog-shaped earring to honour him. This whimsical detail shows a rare glimpse of the private Elizabeth, whose public life was dominated by war, politics, and power. Behind the imposing image of a queen who ruled alone for decades was a woman with humour, affection, and secret tenderness. 14. Edward VII, 1901–1910. Edward VII was notorious for his scandalous private life. Throughout his years, he was known to have at least 55 mistresses, earning him the infamous nickname Dirty Bertie. His affairs were the talk of Europe and a constant source of gossip for the press. Despite this, Edward managed to modernise the monarchy's public image, balancing his private indulgence with a surprisingly effective reign. Still, his legacy remains tied to the wild excesses of his personal passions. 15. Richard III, 1483–1485. Richard III was the last English king to die in battle, meeting his end at the Battle of Bosworth Field. After his death, his body vanished from history for centuries, fueling countless legends. In a twist worthy of a mystery novel, his remains were finally discovered in 2012, buried beneath a modern car park in Leicester. This shocking discovery allowed historians to study his bones, rewriting parts of his story and bringing new life to a king long shrouded in myth. 16. George III, 1760–1820. George III, remembered for his tragic struggles with mental illness, once endured an episode so intense it became legendary. During this spell, he spoke without pause for 58 hours, rambling day and night without rest. Courtiers were horrified as their king slipped further into chaos, his endless speech a haunting symbol of his fragile mind. At a time when mental health was deeply misunderstood, George was seen not as ill, but simply as mad. His suffering became one of history's most surreal royal spectacles. 17. Queen Victoria, 1837–1901. Queen Victoria survived 8 assassination attempts, but the final one was shockingly absurd. The would-be assassin was not driven by politics or revenge. He was merely angry because the Queen had insulted his poetry. Victoria's famously sharp tongue and blunt words nearly cost her life over a trivial comment. This bizarre event highlights the strange mix of reverence and resentment that surrounded the monarchy, where even a casual remark could inspire deadly consequences.